Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a general set, the way enthusiasm for multilateral cooperation, I mean, you know, I would say, you know, certainly openness, receptivity, to some degree preference for, I think what you get, the sense that I get, and again, not somebody who's been a specialist at looking at public opinion polls, is a sense that the world is an extremely complicated place, and there are a whole lot of global problems that the United States and other countries can't solve on their own. And so there is a recognition that there's going to have to be some give and take and some, you know, to some degree, some common sacrifice. And there's, you know, the conditions under which common sacrifice are acceptable will vary according to, you know, how the questions are framed and what the trade-offs are.
We've got about a half hour, and I want to devote that most.
Just in terms of, thanks, Mac. In terms of, there is a bunch of stuff in here on interesting information on world trade, on the global economy, and just a couple of headlines that I'd like to share. One of them is that you know, there's strong support for globalization in most countries of the world that have been polled with questions about the pace of globalization and a sense that that's worrisome. As Steve mentioned, there's you know, almost universal support for including trade, labor and environmental standards, and also a sense amongst developing countries that the rich world isn't playing fair. One touchy issue where protectionist sentiment seems to be coming up and perhaps increasing is growing negative views of foreign direct investment when it comes to actually buying companies and this sort of sovereign wealth fund phenomenon that's come up. In terms of global finance, and this is a one which some of this polling is more recent, since the financial crisis broke, there does seem to be largely widespread international support for the notion of a global regulatory body, with the exception of the United States, where there is less support for the notion of an actual body that would actually regulate cross-border activities of large financial firms. In terms of the World Bank and IMF, the assessments are largely positive.
Brief answers.
Sure. Lucy Webster from Economists for Peace and Security. Do you think you can say that the people who are worried about, that there are only relatively few people worried about black helicopters in the UN? And if so, where do all the anti-globalization people come from, like Seattle and so forth?
Okay. Yes, please. Microphone here. Thank you.
Rachel Robbins, IFC. You've talked about multilateralism, but there's also a growth in regional institutions. And does your research show what people think are better solved at a global level versus regional level?
Okay, finally. Good.
I'm Rachel Schneller here at the Council here in Washington, D.C., and I was wondering if you had done any research, excuse me, on if there is a public opinion ignorance penalty for officials. I mean, for officials who are ignorant of the public, the ones who say, oh, I can't do this because the public wouldn't support me, but they're actually wrong, the public would support them. Have you been able to find that ignorance actually has any negative impact on the official?
Okay, if we're to be serious about a cutoff at 1:30, be brief.
Okay. Yes, I mean, clearly policymakers, when they get out of line with the public, it does eventually catch up with them. I mean, I think that the Bush administration really stretched the rubber band, and I think of it as a rubber band. You can go pretty far, and at a certain point, it just starts pulling back, and then you get well, no, I haven't seen a snap, but I mean so that it pulls back, and the policymakers left standing there.
No, please, it's not fair. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I think we're going to have to move on. On regional versus global, we do have under particularly the second thing on international institutions. There's an analysis that includes a number of different international institutions, regional institutions, where there is sufficient data. There's also a comparison in the discussion of the UN as to what should be dealt with by the United Nations, what should be dealt with by regional organizations, and what should be dealt with by national governments. And I'll probably, rather than trying to go through that, refer you to that. Lucy's question, only a few people worried about any globalization, I mean, the sort of black helicopter versus Seattle. you know, there's not a lot of overlap necessarily between some of these groups. There can be, and you know, you also see some partisan divides on where multilateralism. I mean, Republicans, you know, traditionally, frankly, in terms of the way multilateralism has been defined in terms of, you know, free trade, have been in a sense been sort of on the multilateral side, pushing WTO, Doha round, et cetera, more than the Democrats. So. But I would say, with respect to those who are really antagonistic to multilateralism, they come in a number of different flavors.
I think that we are definitely out of time.